most people don't realize that cardiovascular disease, just like cancer and neurodegenerative disease, takes 20 years or more as it basically is incubating within us before we get clinical signs and symptoms. So that gives an ample opportunity. And for cardiovascular disease, there's so much we can do to prevent this atherosclerosis process from ever getting into the point where it is blocking the blood supply to vital organs, particularly the heart or the brain. And also, of course, the idea that one would have a heart attack or a stroke. So the events that are associated with clotting on top of the atherosclerosis, hardening of the artery process.
Let's dive into that a little bit deeper. So if somebody was 40 years old, man or woman today, and they came to you and they said, hey, I want to know how my heart is aging. What is the best snapshot besides auditing my lifestyle, which we can include inside of that as well? What's the best snapshot to see? Am I aging in a way that's healthy, or do I have what you call accelerated aging, where I could end up being in a position of getting a heart attack, way earlier in life than I quote unquote needed to get a heart attack?
Right. Well, first thing, just to emphasize, which a lot of people still don't know, is that the number one cause of death in women is heart disease. Unfortunately, still there's a perception within women and in the general public that it's cancer. It's not true. It's still heart disease. And interestingly, heart disease is increasing. All right. So now what do we do to find out if somebody's at risk? Well, as you mentioned, there are things like this artery or heart aging clocks, that is to tell us the pace of aging. They're not available yet. They've been published on, and they soon will be available, perhaps before the end of the year or early next year. And that's an exciting advance because we never had a way to do that before. But what we can do today is get a polygenic risk score, which is, very inexpensive. And it says, what level of risk of heart disease, from 0 to 100, with 100 being the highest risk. That's a really good start to tell if somebody has a risk that is not perceived, just not known from the general factors that we commonly associate, like smoking and diabetes, obesity, sedentary lifestyle, and high LDL cholesterol. This adds a lot more to that.
Could you explain the test? Because our audience may not be familiar with it. Where would they end up getting it, right? Is it something you pay for out of pocket? And then when somebody's looking at a report, what kind of information is it actually providing you that's providing all this deeper level of insight? And I want to add to this is that you've been both in your book as well on Twitter, which I love your Twitter. I love your Substack, you writing on there. You've been critical of some aspects of longevity, some aspects of testing that don't have as much science or backing around them, that are wasting people's money and potentially leading them in the wrong direction. We're going to go into that for a second, but help us understand why this is not that you're criticizing.
Well, polygenic risk score can, across all the cancers, the common cancers, heart disease, and Alzheimer's disease, that can be obtained from a saliva sample that's processed with a so-called 1M million SNPs, that are these gene letter variants in our genome, these variants that are tracking with the various diseases of interest. And so, as it turns out, when you are looking at this gene chip data, which is much cheaper, it really can be done for $20, $30. Some of the companies charge 10 times as much, but it's not an expensive test. In the book, I list at least 10 companies that are doing this, and there's more to come. Mass General Brigham in Boston is doing it on their patients as part of their care of patients, and they've reported on that. So it should be the norm. Dhru, this is something that where it sits in the research domain and doesn't get to the clinical routine practice is really unfortunate. Now, that gives us the person a readout of how high a score for heart disease. If it's really high, let's say, 90 or above, that says, there's something going on here that requires further assessment. And that's the best first inexpensive way, beyond the factors that we've already known for decades from the Framingham Heart Study. That's the best way of establishing true risk of heart disease. It doesn't tell us about the pace of aging of the arteries or the heart. We're going to get that in the near term, which is exciting. That's another big advance. Also, very inexpensive tests. They're done through plasma protein, so it requires a blood test, but that'll be available soon as well.
So just coming back to this polygenic risk score, you're giving a saliva sample. It's quite inexpensive, as you mentioned. There's different companies that are out there. Maybe we'll list some of them in the show notes. But largely, you're getting a genetic output showing certain genes or gene SNPs. I'm sure not sure what the right language is. That if you have those, that those are through the literature that's out there have been connected to a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. Am I with you so far?
Absolutely. So let me give a little more explanation. So we are obviously the product of our mother and father. And these polygenic means these common diseases, they're not just one gene that cause them. There's hundreds of gene letter variants that are linked to these diseases, right? So what happens is when you get your own genome, which is a admixture of your mother and father's, you may get a very unusual combination of these letters, these variants, that doesn't show up in your mother or father's family history. Like, for example, I have a really bad family history, but I don't have any heart disease, okay, in my family history. But when I get my polygenic risk score for heart disease, it's like 95, extremely high. And that's just because of the way that these variants came together in me that weren't necessarily showing up in either parent, if that is clear. So
That's absolutely clear.
That's it. It's several hundred of these variants predict heart disease extremely well, the risk of heart disease. And that's it's 20 years of work have gotten to this point in millions and millions of people with all different ancestries. So this is such an invaluable type of data source, and it's amazing it isn't being used.
And within that, you're also emphasizing that there might be limitations. Like you're not going to know from a genetic test how much plaque buildup you have, both calcified plaque and also soft plaque that's there, but at least you'll understand your risk. And if you understand your risk, that would lead to potentially a patient taking more seriously the idea of preventative care. That's the idea that you want people to understand?
Except there's one other dimension to this. So let's say you are at high risk for heart disease, but you don't know from that data whether it's at age 98 or 58. Okay. And that's why the clock data of the artery and the heart is another helpful dimension, because then it starts to frame, how fast is your artery aging, your heart aging. So that's why this imminent rich information will add to the risk, because otherwise you're not sure, when that's going to show up in your life.
So I'm sure you've heard the phrase, genetics load the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger, right? What are your thoughts and commentary on that phrase?
Yeah, I agree. I'm with you. The point here is that if you tell everybody this is what you should do, diet, exercise, sleep, and whatnot, you don't get a lot of uptake. It's general recommendations for the public. When you, I think, alluded to, when you are now talking to a person who is at high risk for a condition, the chances of them getting onto the important lifestyle improvement becomes much higher. It's not 100%, but it's much higher than just non-specific generalized recommendations to all people.
Let's continue on down that pathway of generalized recommendations, right? I believe your background is in cardiology, right? So you were fully the right person to talk about this on top of all the research and, people citing you hundreds, thousands of times, your work over the years. Let's take a common recommendation that happens. People turn, especially males, they turn 40, and whether through a cardiologist or their general practitioner, somebody might recommend a CT scan, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel about those recommendations when it comes to heart health?
Yeah, I'm not into the CT scan alone just for calcium, because I think what it does is that unless you have a zero or extremely low level, it induces tremendous anxiety and it leads to unnecessary procedures. This is what I've seen in my practice, and that extends now for decades, and certainly for the last decade, the overuse of calcium scans has been extraordinary. And I've had too many patients that have been incapacitated who shouldn't have been, just because they had a high calcium score. And we know that calcium is actually an adaptive process to atherosclerosis. The person is trying to get that calcium buildup to prevent the plaque in the artery from cracking or developing a blood clot, right? So I'm not a big fan of it. I do think CT angiograms can be extremely helpful if someone has symptoms or very high risk, because then you get a map of the arteries. No, you're no longer trying to look at specks of calcium. You're getting the real map of whether there's blockages and how severe the blockages are, and everything else. And in fact, as I highlighted in the book, even if you don't have a narrowing, we can now do AI in the wall of the artery, the so-called epicardial fat, and say how inflamed the arteries are, which is really another big advance, because you have very inflamed arteries, they're more likely to cause trouble, even if you don't already have a narrowing. So just to put it, I think that there are some cardiologists that order an internist that order these calcium scans all the time. I'm not enthusiastic because of the experience I've had in so many, I would say hundreds of patients who have been misled, and it's really had a disabling, at least mental health effect on them for no good reason.
So on the con side, there's the mental health impact, and this could go with all sorts of testing. And we'll parse through, what testing is worth it, what's not worth it. And that's my hope. I want to go through cardiovascular disease. I want to talk about cancer. I want to talk about some of the other diseases that you mentioned inside of the book, like neurodegenerative diseases. And we want to also chat about the metabolic diseases as well. But on the con side, for something like a CT scan, you're primarily worried about people seeing it and then immediately feeling like I'm doomed, and then not taking any action?
Well, they might take action, but they're living every day of their life thinking, they some of them become cardiac cripples. They just think that their destiny is to have, very bad heart disease. The other part of this, Dhru, is that doctors react to these high calcium scores and they do angiograms, even though the patients don't have symptoms. And I've even seen people had bypass surgery with no symptoms that was led to by a calcium scan. So there's never been a randomized trial of these calcium CT scans to show that they benefit people, okay? All there are these correlations with that, the higher the calcium score, the more likely they are going to have heart disease. But that's different than, do calcium scans actually help people? And we don't have any data to support that.
I think on an individual level, when I hear from a lot of my podcast audience, when I think about myself, everybody has, especially as they get into their 40s, 50s, and beyond, everybody has that story with heart disease, cardiovascular disease being the number one killer of men and women. Everybody has that story of somebody who was non-symptomatic, went to the gym on Monday morning and dropped dead on the treadmill, and maybe fell and hit their head or something else that ended up happening for it. And so you hear some of these stories, which again are stories that people have in their community, and they're worried that, oh my gosh, could that be me one day? And I'd like to know ahead of time if there was something that could be, done about that. And you mentioned this, these tests, the polygenic risk scores that are there. They're looking at genetics. They're not looking at soft plaque. They're not looking at hard plaque. There's these coming tests that will hopefully be here soon, the ones that you mentioned. But a lot of those individuals are saying, okay, I would want to know at least how much further I've progressed, because do I have to get a lot more aggressive in how I'm treating things? And I'm just trying in my own life weigh the pros and cons of those components. So you've mentioned about CT scans. We've I personally, at the age of 40, with heart disease risk in my family, I decided, after looking at a lot of different evidence, working with a cardiologist who I trusted, I went and got an advanced CCTA scan. It was one of these branded tests that were there. I paid for it. I have no affiliation with the company that was out there. It's called a Clearly scan. I wanted to
Yeah.
see
Oh, yeah.
how much
Yeah.
how much
Sure.
hard plaque do I have? How much soft plaque do I have? Because
Right.
uh, I eat a particular diet and lifestyle and I work out. And I'm not waiting for that test to tell me that, hey, I don't have to do anything. It was more just seeing, am I aging at a healthy level or am I acceleratedly aging when it comes to my heart, especially with me being South Asian and being at the highest risk profile? So do you have any thoughts or commentary about that?
No, just to be clear, the CCTA is the angiogram with actually dye is given, okay? Because you can't get that characterization of the plaque, the buildup of atherosclerosis, whether it's soft or hard, on a calcium scan. So
Right.
I do think that's a good test, although the one you've had isn't as good as the one that the Oxford University is now pending at FDA, which actually gets the inflammation level. And I wrote about that in the book, and there's been several papers with, extended follow-up, 15, 20 years of that with angiograms. So that is even more impressive than the Clearly test that you had. But still, what you had is better than a plain calcium scan. The problem is, it's expensive. There's some
Yeah. I think mine was
radiation.
about like $2,000 plus you have to have a
Yeah, yeah,
doctor interpret
right.
it.
I try to come up with things that are inexpensive that are, giving us, if you'd had symptoms, okay, or let's say you somehow had a stress test that was very positive, then I think that what you had would be good. But it may be too much to go for such an expensive test like that, for example, you would it probably was a good result. You probably didn't have anything to worry about. But you would also know about that from a very inexpensive polygenic risk score if that was very low, or even intermediate. That would be very reassuring for you. So it's fine that you did that. Not everybody has a couple $1,000 isn't covered by insurance, right?
Sure.
And so I try to come up with things that will work for everybody because, there's enough of longevity people out there that are selling supplements and selling total body MRIs and drugs that are not, getting have any evidence. I don't want to do that. I'm trying to stick with the evidence, and I don't have a problem. Somebody, has enough money, they can want to get some extra tests, but sometimes it backfires. Sometimes the test winds up with finding things that are not clinically relevant. It leads to more procedures, and it can be a trouble. It can be a problem.
Well, that's what I appreciate about your book, Super Agers, which is you're here to bring a different sort of idea around aging and help people understand what's worth doubling down on. And as you mentioned, what things can potentially take you awry so that people could have a version of informed consent on their longevity journey, right? They can understand what's worth it, what's going to damage the pocketbook, but is a gamble, right? And what is completely going to potentially going to be taking you off track that doesn't have research or maybe even has some emerging research showing that it could actually lead to opposite results. And we're going to be talking about that, especially when it comes to some aspects of cancer. So already available right now, these polygenic risk scores, and there's some companies that are out there that do them. And it's an inexpensive test. They might be bundled with other things. So people have to kind of do their own research that's out there. And and then hopefully soon, you're saying maybe like a year or two will be this more advanced test that will measure the actual aging of the arteries. What was the name of
Right.
that again?
So it's a proteomic protein test,
Mhm.
hundreds of proteins that come out of partitioning with AI that track with each organ of the body, brain, immune system as a system, artery, heart, liver, kidney, pancreas, lung. So you get these organ clocks, which I think is one of the biggest advances that we've had in medicine in a long time. And that is then giving a much more uh, temporal dimension of risk, right? So it confirms the risk, but it also says, well, how far along are you? How fast accelerated aging of your arteries or your heart, whatever in this case, is taking place. There are This work was first pioneered by Stanford University, and they've set up a couple of different companies, Teal Omics and Vero Bioscience. They're about to get these launched commercially. It will not be 2 years. It'll be months from now. And we're going to be using them in some of our research studies. So they can get to scale, inexpensive tests that help get us these really important proteins that reflect aging of various parts of our body. Relevant to our current discussion is about the arteries and the heart.
And with these tests, because I'm not as familiar with them, of course, is there the level of scrutiny on the research end that's there that you'd be looking for to feel excited about?
Oh, yeah. No, I don't get excited unless it gets independently replicated, meaning by other groups, multiple times, with large cohorts, extended follow-up, like I said, 10, 15-year follow-up. And so that's when I start to say, there's something here. There's like a eureka moment that we have made a big advance in medicine. So that's why I'm keen on organ clocks. And, I think that's, unfortunately, and I can't emphasize this enough, in the research world, we make big advances, but the lag that it takes to get into the clinical world of doctors not only knowing about it, but changing their practice, it takes much too long. It shouldn't be this way. So if you ask physicians now about organ clocks, most of them don't know about it. And when they are available soon, they won't know about it. And it's the same thing as polygenic risk scores. What doctors are recommending those? Very few. It's just unfortunate that we have such a body of evidence that gets ignored now and it continues to be ignored. And we just have to go beyond that.
Well, one area that is extremely common that you write about in the book is the area of cancer.
Yeah.
Many people actually don't know that there's a lot of things that they could do, or there's a few things that stand up to your level of scrutiny to detect and pay attention to how we are headed down the path of eventually ultimately getting cancer or, keeping our risk lower. So first, let's talk about some of the testing. What are some of the best, and then also we'll get to some of the worst type of testing that you think is out there? I think that there's some overlap with these polygenic risk scores. There's also some connection to cancer, but there's also some additional testing that you think is relatively a good offering, bang for buck wise. Can you talk about that?
Sorry to interrupt, but memory loss is on the rise. And that's why I've created a free guide that you can get right now featuring the top brain boosting foods that you can include into your diet starting today to help you combat this. I've worked with a few of my friends to feature 5 foods in this free guide. And guess what? A couple of them will probably surprise you. Make sure you're one of the people that focuses on keeping your brain sharp by downloading this guide today. Just click on the link below or scan the QR code and I'll send you the guide right away.
Yeah, so again, the polygenic risk scores, that one saliva sample that you can get all these risk scores from, tells us about all the common cancers: breast, colon, prostate, lung, all the common cancers that are out there. So
from a genetic standpoint.
Yeah, from common variants, right? So these are in 5% of the population or more, and there are hundreds of variants that track with each of these cancers. And so you get the same kind of readout. Are you very high risk, or you're low risk, whatever. Now, in addition to that, in our genome sequence, this is a whole genome of 6 billion letters, which amazingly now you can get that done, a whole genome sequence, for a couple $100, a tenth of what it costs to get that CT angiogram that you had. And that tells us about rare variants that you may not know about that would be like, for example, BRCA for breast cancer, but also that carries a risk for other cancers like prostate cancer. Lynch syndrome, which is a risk for colon cancer. So that gives us another dimension of cancer susceptibility genes. All right. Now, beyond those, of course, if a person has these mutations, these variants, family history, other risk factors, then we can do more. We can do a multi-cancer early detection test, a blood test that picks up if there's microscopic tumor DNA in our plasma from a blood sample. So there's all sorts of things we can do to get ahead of cancer because, again, it takes 20 years to manifest a cancer that's building within us, and we wind up making the diagnosis, very late. And these screening studies we do, Dhru, like mammography and colonoscopy and others, they're not very good at picking up cancers until they're pretty far along, and they don't catch most cancers actually at all.
So for the woman who's listening today, and also, of course, men are impacted by cancer as well, too. But let's take, for instance, breast cancer, which is on the minds of a lot of my audience, being, let's say, 75% female in that prime age where a lot of people are sort of talking about this conversation, 40 to 65 plus. What would your recommendation be? And obviously, this is not medical advice, but what would the recommendation be for a consideration? And we'll go through a few cohorts of people. Somebody who knows people in their friend group, maybe not directly their family, who are struggling for breast cancer. They're seeing these different statistics that some cancers are on the rise, and they're getting these general recommendations from their practitioners of, hey, you should get your annual mammogram after maybe a certain age, or a mammogram every so many years based on the age that they're at. Should they be still moving forward with those recommendations, or is it worthwhile exploring a different path, like one of these blood tests that you mentioned that can pick up some of these cancer proteins?
Yeah, it's a good and important question, like most of your questions, actually. Here we have a lot of problems with mammography because, as it's been shown, if you take women who are 50 years old and they have their mammogram every 2 years for a decade, they have, over that period of time, 60% will have a false positive readout, which causes, again, not just a lot of anxiety, but it can cause, the woman is brought back, has more scans, sometimes biopsies, might even lead to unnecessary surgery, right? So we got a real problem with false positives and also false negatives. Now, what we've learned, and this is from the largest trial in the history of medical AI in Sweden, with over 80,000 women. Half of them had mammography read by radiologists. Half of them had the radiologist plus AI. That picked up 25% more breast cancer missed by the radiologist. And these are not trivial breast cancers. These are significant ones. So the point being is that every woman who has a mammogram in this country should have a AI for no extra charge, because that way you're not going to have a false negative, all right? And so that's unfortunate. Again, we have the data from this remarkable study published 2 different articles in the Lancet, and we have it incorporated in daily practice in the US, right? So that's a problem. And in fact, one of the big radiology companies around the country, I think it's called RadNet, is charging women extra, like $35 if they want to get the AI read out. That's crazy. It should just be part of the mammogram, right? Now, who should get these extra tests, like a polygenic risk score, genome sequence? If there's a family history of breast cancer or even other clustering of cancer, it's probably good to get those tests, because even though a gene mutation might be connected with one type of cancer, like BRCA for breast cancer, BRCA1 or 2, it also can be connected with other forms of cancer. So in people who have this family history of clustering of cancer, it's good to get the genetics done, right? And again, it's quite inexpensive. And that would temper how frequent a mammogram should be done, when it should be initiated. Like, for example, should it be age 40, age 45? We're even seeing breast cancer crop up in women in their 30s now. Overall, there's been a big spike of cancer, not just breast cancer, colon cancer and others in young people, which is really disconcerting. So our approach to cancer shouldn't just be on the basis of age. It should just be on other factors which aren't taken into account. Right now, every woman age 45 is supposed to get a mammogram every couple of years, if not more frequently. And that's just not backed up by good data.
I think that one of the challenges that happens, just zooming out and looking at this whole space, not being the subject matter expertise like you are, right? I'm not the subject matter expertise. I find that a lot of people who listen to my podcast, listen to other people's podcast, because healthcare feels so confusing. And essentially, if they read your book, which I highly recommend, there's a lot of advocacy of them stepping into sort of a little bit more of the CEO role of their health. They may not be the
Yeah.
doctor,
Yeah.
but they got to be a little bit of the CEO. But then there's not always clear answers for them, and they're relying on healthcare practitioners. I see it as sort of action reaction when it comes to things like people seeking out whole body MRIs, which I know you've been critical about. We'll talk about that in a second. Is that they feel like they hear mixed things, and they feel like even in a case where somebody is super evidence-based like yourself, they're saying that medicine isn't often being practiced in the way that is based on the latest research and science. So those individuals can be very vulnerable to the different competing forces that are out there that are saying, hey, listen, a whole body MRI may not be perfect, but in some cases you're not being you're obviously not being exposed to radiation. Yes, there might be incidental, findings. There might be some false positives or false negatives that might be there, but hey, that problem is there with also, X-rays as well too. But at least we can catch maybe some cancers a little bit earlier that wouldn't have been picked up in a mammogram. That's at least what a lot of people have heard, like what they've been left with on my podcast when they're trying to seek out the best way to go about stuff. Are you sympathetic at all to sort of that, why we're in a little bit of this mess that you outline inside of the book?
Yeah, well, you're bringing up some important points for me to respond to. Firstly, I do think that we do have a problem in the medical community of not keeping up with the data and evidence. And so that's on the medical community. That's on us overall. Yes. We also have a mistrust problem, which is leading to these, influencers and social media and, lack of evidence filling in the holes and recommending total body MRI. Like, for example, what are the data to support total body MRI? That Kim Kardashian had one and said saved her life, or whoever the celebrity is? There are no data published, okay, to show that getting a total body MRI saved a life. Not one, just anecdotes of this one or that one. The point being is that if you are picking up cancer on an MRI, and if indeed it's cancer, I think you kind of minimize the incidental findings, which I've seen people nearly die from a liver biopsy bleed for something that wasn't a cancer, or a collapsed lung, pneumothorax for a lung biopsy that wasn't a cancer. So there's lots of incidental findings that get chased down. In the book, I talk about Dhru Purohit Show, who is a New Yorker writer, but also a physician at Cornell, who his whole mind has been, real estate in his brain has been taken over by this prostate mass that's not been characterized despite, and he's young like you. So it can lead to lots of incidental findings, right? The problem is it doesn't prevent, if you do pick up cancer on a total body MRI, it's already at a big state of billions of cells. You haven't prevented the cancer. It's a mass now, right? So if you want to prevent the cancer, you need to get it either just identify someone's high risk and put them under surveillance, or identify it at a microscopic level where you can then rev up the immune system and do other things to squash it before it shows up on an MRI. I don't consider finding an actual cancer on a total body MRI is a prevention, because it's already big enough to see on an MRI. That, if it's real. Of course, a lot of these are not real cancer. There's so many that are chased down rabbit holes that aren't. So we have no data. And the main company pushing these total body MRIs, not just the influencers, Pronovo, they said they're going to do a trial over the years ahead. They have no trial. There's no publication that proves that this is benefiting people. So we have a problem here. Is a lot of people are going out and they're paying, a couple $1,000s for these total body MRIs, not covered by insurance and not substantiated by evidence. So that's why I'm against them. On the other hand, if your microscopic blood tests the blood test that says you have some tumor DNA present. Well, an AI can be used to say which organ is likely responsible, whether it's the colon, the breast, or pancreas, whatever. Then you could get a total body MRI. That's a different matter. Okay, to hopefully not see any mass, because then it's already, somewhat advanced. So I hope you understand what I'm trying to say is I'm not against total body MRI when it's necessary. I just don't think it's our best way to prevent cancer, and it leads to potentially overriding incidental findings that can be very problematic for patients.
On the cancer side, is the blood test that you're talking about? I know there's a few that are out there. Like, is it Grails? Is that the main one that you would say?
Grail has been used, I think, in 400,000 or more people now. The problem I have with it is being used for age 50 and older. And so if you just take somebody age 50 who doesn't have any risk factors for cancer, no family history, you're going to get a low yield of picking up cancer at an early state. But it has done that, picked up early microscopic cancer not seen by MRI. That's good. But in order for us to do that Grail or there's 10 other ones, many are coming on to be commercially available. They don't have as much of a track record yet. But these tests, they should be used in people at high risk, not just indiscriminately, right? So what we have now is indiscriminate use of MRIs, of these tests, of everything. That's not a good way to go ahead. You want to establish a person's risk. You're familiar with Bayes' theorem, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the test is only as good as the pre-test probability, right? And so if you have a low pre-test probability, then the test stinks. All right, that's what we're talking about, is using tests like Grail or total body MRI when there's no high risk. We should be coupling high risk with any test that we do. We can establish a person's risk.
Your feeling is the current environment is not really set up to do that on a level that benefits most people who are listening. So you're also understanding that people are navigating this on their own. And within that, you're trying to bring them back to the things, knowing that most people who are listening are trying to, in a way, be their own doctor, even though they're not a doctor. They're trying to figure out and put these pieces of the puzzle together in between 15-minute appointments, no conversation about really prevention with a doctor. You're saying, okay, I understand all that. I understand it's complicated. Within that, here's the things that I want you to consider, right?
Yeah. And also, if enough people do this, it's like a grassroots, campaign to get medicine on track. If enough people were informed, which is why I wrote Super Agers, right? If they are informed, they can drive this, okay? And even if their physician isn't familiar, they can become familiar. And a lot of this can be done without a physician too. So we need a campaign to get medicine on track. We're not there based on the evidence that has been generated by, now many, many years of really high quality research that sits in another orbit, not the clinical care orbit.
Yeah. Let's switch over to some of these neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. In your book, you talk about some pretty exciting blood work that's available now that could be part of the idea of catching some of these early so that we can be more aggressive and maybe even double down with lifestyle factors that people sometimes don't double down on until they find out that they have a higher risk, as you talked about earlier. So do you want to talk about the blood test in particular that you mentioned for Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah. So Dhru, this is a real breakthrough. And it's culminated over the recent years. I've never seen anything in neuroscience as important as this, because up until now, we haven't had a way to prevent Alzheimer's disease. Most people would say that's the top of their dreaded list, that they would not want to ever have that disease. And basically, it was kind of a fatalistic issue. If you're at high risk, that, if you live long enough, you're going to develop first cognitive impairment and then Alzheimer's. This test, called p-tau 217, it's a blood biomarker for the site 217 on the tau misfolded protein that accumulates in our brain. It's as good as a PET scan, which is a lot of radiation and only available at certain places, a PET scan for amyloid or tau. And it is picking up the risk of Alzheimer's 20 up to 20 some years before a person develops mild cognitive impairment. But beyond all those important features, it's modifiable. If you exercise, if you improve your lifestyle factors, you can bring it down along with these other parallel markers like p-tau 181 and GFAP and neurofilament and many others. But p-tau 217 is the best one we've seen. It's extraordinary. You'd have to otherwise, go to do a lumbar puncture, which nobody would want to have, to get cerebral spinal fluid. We can now do this in a blood sample. So it's really extraordinary. It's been available in the US for the last 2 years. And this is something that if you're at high risk for Alzheimer's, because you have ApoE4 genotype, family history of Alzheimer's, high polygenic risk score for Alzheimer's, you could benefit by getting this and then getting onto a really great lifestyle program to bring it down and either defer or preempt your risk.
If, let's say somebody like myself, my grandfather had Alzheimer's disease at the very end. And at that point in time, he was already dealing with and battling a cancer. He had like a cancer that started in his mouth and kind of moved forward. So I don't know the exact type of cancer that he had. But if I wanted to go get this test, this blood test for looking at my likelihood of Alzheimer's disease, and I have done my 23andMe data, and I've uploaded it to a lot of people are doing, to some AI program that they might have, either OpenAI, ChatGPT, or Grok, or something else. And there are some other people that are out there that have these genetic reports that you can upload to in companies. And I did see that I have one of the alleles, I guess is the term.
ApoE4.
ApoE4, right? I don't have the double allele, but I have one of the alleles that are there. So
20% of people have ApoE4 carriers.
So now let's say, okay, I have some family history. I have the gene. Genes don't immediately mean that you're going to get it. There's just an increased likelihood that's there. I'm doing a lot of the things that I've read and heard about from individuals about protecting my brain as I age, staying away from ultra-processed foods, staying metabolically healthy, working out, et cetera, et cetera. But let's say I wanted to get this blood test done. What's my best option? Am I going to try to convince my primary care provider to order it for me? Do I try to go to one of these direct lab companies or direct to consumer companies and see if they offer it? What would you recommend?
Yeah. So first, since you already have uploaded your 23andMe data and you got your ApoE4, you can also get your polygenic risk scores from that data too.
So just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, could you give me my polygenic risk score? And I believe you had a Twitter thread, an X thread about this a few weeks ago, and you linked to a study. I actually uploaded that study, which was talking about polygenic risk scores in the form of Alzheimer's disease. And I uploaded the study to ChatGPT. I uploaded my raw data, and it walked me through a score-based system.
Yeah, there you go.
Of that information. So, okay, so you're okay with the average consumer who's listening today, average podcast listener, doing that, understanding that AI has limitations, and always kind of keep that in mind, but generally is going to be giving pretty good data.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the output from the various AI choices, whether it's Grok or ChatGPT or the others, but it's a starting point. It's basically free if you get a hold of your 23andMe data. It can also be done with your ancestry DNA data if you can upload that. So yeah, I mean, it's worth doing that, to get a handle on it. I can't vouch for if it's as good as done by up-to-date variants, that are up to the moment literature, but it might be a really good start. Now, as far as getting the p-tau 217, you can get that through a physician's order, get it through LabCorp, Quest. Fuji has a new one that was just FDA approved several weeks ago. So there's lots of ways to get it. I don't know if you can get it direct to consumer. Probably can, but I'm not aware of that route. It's last I saw was $190 to get this through the main big labs around the country. So it's not expensive. It's not cheap, but it's not that expensive. And I wouldn't recommend it for anybody, but someone like you who has ApoE4, family history, you already got 2 of the 3 big risk factors. The polygenic risk score would be the other one. If that showed that you're at high risk, then you have all 3 of the risk factors, right? And the good thing is you're young, right? So let's say your p-tau217 comes out really low. I mean, you're basically good. You're good for the next couple of decades, probably. You can check it every now and then, the next few years, but that's anticipatory of a long period of time ahead. So I think it'd be worthwhile in your situation. Yes.
It might be worthwhile. I'll link to it in the show notes, but I'll just share my screen with you here for a moment. If you can get a chance to see, this is when I previously had put all my information in. So I put it all into ChatGPT, including my genetic data from 23andMe. And I answered a bunch of lifestyle questions. So it gave me a breakdown of based on that paper that you had linked to. Again, this isn't medical advice. This was just me, trying to navigate some of this stuff. So I have this ApoE, E3, E4. It added a +3 for my risk factor.
Yeah.
My polygenic SNPs, it added a +9.
Yeah.
Several risk variants, including homozygous BIN1 and a bunch of other stuff.
Yep.
So my subtotal genetic risk score was 12. So that's considered slightly elevated, right?
That's big. And you know what's great is in your lifetime, you're going to be able to prevent Alzheimer's very likely, which is you're so lucky, right? You're getting an early start. You've identified that you are at high risk. And there's so many ways that we're going to prevent Alzheimer's in the future. Lifestyle that you're on it already. We can talk about that more. But you are the prototype of the future because you now know you're at high risk for Alzheimer's in your lifetime. You don't know when, age 70 or age 90, but you are at high risk for late onset Alzheimer's disease. Yeah.
Right. But the great thing is that we even talk about now, and I do believe in the future of technology. I'm a techno-optimist. I'm so excited about AI and all the things it'll bring to medicine and healthcare and democratizing that. And there's many things that we could do right now. So I answered a bunch of the questions that were in there for if you have a negative risk factor, you get an added score. If you have positive risk factors, that takes away. So again, I'll link to this, a snapshot. But if you look at it, based on the fact of me answering a bunch of different things, I had a -7 taken away. So I had a +12 because of my genetics, but because my lifestyle factors are dialed in, I had a -7. So there's things that we can do now today.
Yeah.
Right. That make a huge difference. And this is what you're talking about inside of your book. And I'll just share this since I have you here. My genetic total was 12+. My lifestyle was -7. So my total risk score was +5. So walking away from this, my interpretation was continue to pay attention to this, stay true to your lifestyle. Some things that other people may not be worried about as much, like moderate level of alcohol. I've just chosen not to have alcohol personally, right? I know the data can be a little bit mixed on moderate to light levels of alcohol, but these are things that make me feel good about the lifestyle decisions that I'm choosing to help me continue to keep my risk score lower as I continue to age.
Good for you. I give you a lot of credit. You're working in a futuristic path here, and I love it. I don't know what the lifestyle factors that were probed by ChatGPT, but did it ask about your sleep data?
It asked about, it went through sleep quality, right? It went through alcohol, smoking. Are you eating an anti-inflammatory diet, physical activity?
Yeah.
But it also asked, which is where I think that it's important that we have podcasts. As much as influencers and individuals get criticism, the challenge that we've had for a long time, and much of that criticism is warranted, is the data has been there for years. It's just, it doesn't get talked about. And you got to figure out who you want to listen to and pay attention to. For example, one of the areas that it asked about is air pollution. There's been so much data for years that if you live in a highly polluted area, that you are more likely to increase your risk of getting certain diseases, both cardiovascular
all the ones
disease,
we're talking about, cardiovascular, neurodegenerative, and cancer. Yeah. And type 2 diabetes add to that too. Yeah.
Even having family that's in medicine, many doctors being Indian, I have so many doctors in my family. I never had one of them ever talk about this. I never had my primary care provider talk about this. It was always learning from things like podcasts. Again, there's the good and there's the bad, or seeing people that I look up to like Peter Attia, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, other individuals who would say this data has been around there, it just doesn't get attention. And then one step further being that, okay, if we know that air pollution is a problem, we also know based on EPA studies that indoor air is often up to 300 times more polluted because of off-gassing. Cooking is a big contributor to indoor air being polluted. So that's when I personally chose, okay, great. I'm just going to get a low cost, good quality HEPA filter just to make sure. Now, is there randomized controlled trials about this? No. But do we know enough about air pollution being an issue for people and being connected to these diseases that I'm going to take a little bit more of a precautionary approach in my life because I have an increased risk of something like an Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, so let me be clear. I'm not calling for randomized trials of everything in medicine or health, okay? I concur with your position that the data for indoor air pollution is important. Not everybody thinks about it as just outdoor. And the point here is if you use a HEPA filter, it can't do any harm, all right? It's not like a total body MRI or a calcium scan. It can do harm. So I'm looking at risk benefit, and you know what? If there's no risk of something, but only potential benefit, that's different for criteria for requiring a randomized trial to weigh the balance of harm and risk, okay, or and benefit. So let's make sure that we are on sync on that one. I think what you're doing is great. The other sleep measure besides quality, like deep sleep, is sleep regularity. Turns out to be really important. And I don't know if you are one that, younger people tend to have all sorts of different times when they retire for bed. I don't know where you are, but that's one that turns out to be important across the board, just like air pollution and so many others, because we have this circadian rhythm that we often don't respect. And that one surprisingly has a significant correlation. So not just quality, but also regularity.
Yeah, regular being going to sleep relatively within an hour of the same time, ideally the same time that's there, waking up about the same time. That's a good indicator of sleep quality, but also it's a good lifestyle habit to support your circadian rhythm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, anything else that you want to mention about neurodegenerative diseases? Some things that have been a little bit sort of viral in the last month, one of the fastest growing, I think, if not the fastest growing neurodegenerative disease is Parkinson's disease, right? Mm-hmm. And there is a group of researchers that are making a strong argument. It's emerging data that's there that Parkinson's disease is largely a man-made disease based on environmental toxins. Right. And we need more and more research around it. But there was this viral study that came out that there's associative, again, not a causative, but that people that lived next to golf courses. Did you see this data? That
I know. Ray Dorsey, the neurologist who I know very well, is one of the authors. Yeah. So the pesticide story,
can you explain it for those that are not familiar in our audience?
Yeah. So the more one was exposed to pesticides by proximity to golf courses, which use these, the more incidence over time was seen of Parkinson's. So the link, as you say, not causal, but an association. And that wasn't the first time it's been reported, of course. And Ray has a book out on this. He's really concerned about the environmental risk that are attributing to our increased prevalence of Parkinson's, right? So I wouldn't be surprised because, like you said, air pollution, ultra-processed foods, microplastics, nanoplastics, forever chemicals, these are all burdens that increase body and brain inflammation, right? And pesticides, you can add that to the list as well. So I don't know that it's the fundamental, root cause of Parkinson's, but it's very likely a contributing factor, right? And like you said earlier about the genes and the, additional hits in people who are predisposed to Parkinson's, this certainly could be an added factor, especially. Yeah.
Well, let's wrap up on the other big disease category that you talk about, which are these metabolic diseases, like type 2 diabetes, for example, right? These ones are a little bit easier to catch early. Would you say that is a fair statement?
Yes, because we can use things like glycohemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose, triglycerides, blood pressure. They're very easy to diagnose metabolic syndrome or pre-diabetes, so you can prevent their progression to actual type 2 diabetes, which we certainly want to prevent.
Anything that you think that would be relevant or important for people when talking about this last category that we're chatting about, these metabolic diseases? So, they're largely lifestyle driven. That's an important thing. And if there was the single most important thing that you could do on a regular basis to reduce your risk of developing them, would you say that would be regular exercise?
Well, that's up there, definitely. There's a genetic component too, because there are probably 90 million people with pre-diabetes in the United States, and about a third of those are thin people. So it's not just that they, got obese. So it does occur, and that's definitely a genetic contribution that's making its the manifestation of that, and the fact that they may not have the best lifestyle factors as well, right? But some people, they do everything right, exercise, and they still have a high hemoglobin A1C and signs of insulin resistance or even metabolic syndrome. So, okay, what can we do about this? Well, for one, as you said, picking it up in a physical or visit, those tests are easy to get. Obviously, checking one's blood pressure and getting things like a fasting glucose, glycohemoglobin A1C. These are important to know about because some people are harboring these pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes risk factors, which, as you know, that's not an old person's disease. That can show up very young in life, in their 30s and 40s, and getting ahead of that and preventing the progression. We just published a study in Nature Medicine, July 31st, a big study. We use continuous glucose sensors to help pick up people at risk, and those people that have very high spikes after eating, or even not even with food, but just high spikes and high duration of those spikes, they were more likely to be associated with progression to diabetes. All right, so they're more serious. That's another way we can get a handle on this. The other one thing we didn't talk about for this, as well as for Alzheimer's, is the gut hormone story.
Please, I'd love to.
This is the biggest thing in medicine, that I've seen in a long time. That people think, Ozempic or Zepbound, we're there. No, that's just the beginning, right? As I wrote a chapter in the book, it took 20 years to finally figure out that we ought to try weight loss as an indication, obesity. But now, as you know very well, we're seeing benefits across all sorts of things for kidney, liver, heart disease, migraine, headaches, polycystic ovary syndrome and infertility, and the list gets longer all the time. Next month, there are 2 trials for Alzheimer's coming out, for people who already have mild Alzheimer's, not for prevention. And I wasn't optimistic they were going to be positive, but it sounds like they may well be. Even if they're not, the point here, Dhru, is that we have so many more of these gut hormone mimetics coming. There's more than 10 of them, not just the 2 that we have in common use today. And they're going to have combinations. They're going to be in pill form, not injectables. They're going to become inexpensive. And they're going to be used increasingly frequently to prevent this prediabetes or metabolic syndrome progression, not just in people with diabetes. And they may well be used to prevent Alzheimer's, which would be extraordinary. And I wouldn't be surprised in your lifetime, because you're at increased risk for Alzheimer's, you'll be taking some kind of gut hormone pill. It may not be like the ones we have today, but it may be a combination of one of the ones we have today in your future. We'll see how it plays out.
So just to connect the dots for our audience, you're talking about the sort of explosion of people using maybe different GLP type drugs?
Yeah, the GLP drugs are basically
agonist.
It's working on the same hormone that we have naturally, at that receptor, glucagon-like receptor, GLP-1. And then there's, the GIP, which is GIP, gastrointestinal peptide, and there's glucagon, and these are all gut hormones. And gut hormones talk to our immune system, and they talk to our brain, and they knock down inflammation in our brain and body. And they're turning out to be more useful than we had ever imagined. As you know, we're already seeing people who are alcoholics, gambling addicts, nicotine addicts, drug addicts, nail biting addiction. All these people seem to be benefiting as well. So it's having effects that are far more pronounced than
For
we
sure.
ever envisioned. And we're in the starting zone here. There's many more of these coming, and they're in clinical trials. So if you think, things are big now, follow this space. It's just going to get more exciting over time.
From my standpoint, help me understand if this is a correct way to think about it, right? Painting the picture for our audience who's, hearing this conversation. Our modern lifestyle, which has come with a lot of incredible benefits and technology and life-saving drugs, et cetera, improved, outcomes at birth, less women dying in birth, more babies saved, so many great things. But our modern lifestyle, primarily when we look at sort of the big food component of it, is so addictive that it's just been incredibly difficult for people to eat in a way that would naturally be producing these hormones on their own. So it's not that these drugs are adding something new. They're more the taking out that sort of addictive piece and causing the overeating of certain foods that are driving a lot of these diseases in the first place. And if those foods are not there and the overconsumption of calories are not there, you end up getting your body's natural healing effects that would be preventing these diseases. Is that an incomplete or incorrect way to think about things?
I don't know. The reason I say that is because the age-related diseases, the three that we spoke about, cardiovascular, cancer, neurodegenerative, they are really an outgrowth of a immune system that's dysfunctional, dysregulated, and the attendant inflammation that goes with that. And so, in general, as we age, this has nothing to do with eating too many calories. As we age, our immune system starts to go immunosenescence, and we lose some of that protection and that tight regulation. And we also have inflammaging, right? So what I'm talking about is for age-related diseases, the big three that we discussed here today, that we need something more to counter the process in some people. All right. So if you're a 70 and you have lots of signs of immunosenescence, your immune system isn't working well, that may have nothing to do with your lifestyle. It may just be the process of aging in you. We have a way now forward on top of lifestyle to modulate that. And that's why I think we're going to see a big jump in the number of super agers in the future, the welderly as we call it, because we have a way to modulate the age-related diseases, which we've never done before. We have never prevented Alzheimer's. We have never really prevented cancers in people at high risk. And our work in preventing heart disease is not something exemplary by any means. We can change that. That's what's so momentous about this time right now.
As we wind down here today, I'd love to get your thoughts on a couple more things for our audience that you talk about in the book. So one of the areas that I want you to talk about is this explosion of different ways to measure our biological age.
Yeah.
You've already talked about some of the ones that you're super excited about. Can you talk about the buyer beware side of the biological clocks that are out there?
Yeah, so the one that's marketed a lot is the methylation clock. These are the epigenetic markers, side chains of our DNA. Also can be done with saliva. And there are a lot of direct-to-consumer companies that are marketing these for very high prices. And it's actually a very inexpensive test, right? So you shouldn't be spending a lot of money to get these. I do think they're going to have value when they're standardized and high quality, like we see in academic labs that are doing research. But a lot of these companies I don't trust, right? Because I don't know how well they're actually doing the assays. And I do know they're charging, hundreds of dollars for a simple test of methylation markers. What they're telling us is epigenetic age. If you think of it as how is our body rusting out, and these methylation markers are kind of like the rust. The problem is that it's not the same as biologic age. That's just the dimension of our methylation. Now, it does give you, let's say for you, it could say, Dhru, your methylation age is 35 years, but you're 40 something, right? That's great. And most of these companies give a report that's favorable. So I don't know what that means. But the point is, if you have an advanced methylation age, right, where it's a gap that's going in the wrong direction, that might be a cue that something's going on and you might want to see an organ age. So you see what I'm saying is it doesn't give you any specificity. Currently, it's being charged too much commercially. We need to get better inexpensive ones that we can rely on that are standardized. But eventually it's a very low cost kind of body-wide assay that could be useful. Right now, I don't recommend getting it. It's not really biological age. It's epigenetic methylation age.
On the topic of aging, I'm going to repeat something I heard you say in another interview, and you tell me if I got it right. There is this idea that people's bodies could be aging at different levels, right? Some people
Yes.
have accelerated aging. Some people are better at how they're aging, and they could become a super ager, as you write about inside your book. So that is a valid idea. But the only thing clinically, research-wise, that we know for sure, without a fact, that can slow down your biological clock, right? So I'm 43, but if I want my biology to be 35, 37, whatever it might be, the only thing that is proven right now is exercise. Is that correct?
Yeah. So this Horvath clock, the epigenetic clock that I was talking about, the only intervention so far that's definitively improved that, and this is, Steve Horvath and I wrote about this in the Lancet, and he's published independently on that, is exercise. No other lifestyle factors that we know. Now, some of them haven't all been tested. Recently, there's some interest that omega-3 intake, whether it be through foods or even supplement, might achieve that. Hasn't been replicated yet. And semaglutide, Ozempic, just published recently. Again, not independently replicated, and was done in a very special group of people with HIV, lipohypertrophy, but looked good. But so far, the only thing that's been definitively shown to improve epigenetic methylation age is exercise.
Have you, over the years, changed or re-emphasized your recommendations as you become more familiar with the data of how much exercise people actually need to achieve some of the benefits? Have you changed your mind over the years of how much you tell people as a doctor, as a cardiologist, to double down on the exercise? Like, what is your recommendation now, and has that changed over the years?
Well, it has to be, adjusted to the person. First thing I do when I'm going over with a person, and of course, even in my own life is, when are they going to exercise? How? Are we talking about, brisk walking? Or are we talking about other aerobic forms of exercise, bicycling, treadmill, elliptical, whatever? Talking about getting 5 sessions a week, ideally. Hey, but even if we can get less than that, at least 30 minutes a session, that's been backed up for years. I've been doing that for decades, right? That has strong support. The new thing, of course, is that resistance training added to that, a couple of sessions a week, is also, perhaps equally as important. And as a cardiologist, I didn't have enough respect for that data until I reviewed it. And I've changed my practice personally, no less, advocating to patients that a couple of sessions of strength training, and I would also add in there balance training, which is really important as we get older. Those are equally important. So they have to somehow get integrated. And do you have to go crazy, extreme? No. As we saw in a recent paper, 7,000 steps was a plateau per day of seeing some of the real benefits of exercise. So it doesn't have to be going crazy extreme, but there is some unknown about that plateau of benefit from vigorous to, very vigorous activity. We don't really know. It's one of the things I got into in the book, which is there a limit too much, triathlons and Ironman and stuff like that. But, for most of the case, the more exercise, the better. And even if it's not vigorous, even if it's moderate, it's still really good. And, it's never too late to get into a good, solid exercise program. And for me, I started, in my 60s to get into strength training. I was never into that. And now I'm really, it's made a big difference. And I really appreciate the data that supports it.
That's huge. Have you also seen an improvement in some of the things that you've been measuring that might be related to that, besides noticing that you're getting stronger? Are you a participant in any of these tests that you've mentioned, or your regular metabolic labs, like your fasting insulin or other things? Have you seen those things improve?
Well, those were normal for me, as far as I don't have any signs of metabolic syndrome or pre-diabetes. But, certainly stronger, yes. Just feeling more fit and, it's helped in a lot of ways. But I don't know that I can come up with a parameter. I haven't done an epigenetic clock. My p-tau 217 is pending right now, so I'll let you know when I get that back. But I didn't have one before, so I don't know. But so I'm waiting to get my organ clock data too. But I think one of the things to emphasize, what's so exciting here, is a lot of the things we've talked about today are new. We never had these tools, these metrics before. And that's what's going to help us in this path to prevention. And, whether it's people like you who are young, or even as we get older, I think most people do want to be super agers and live 85 plus with no cancer, no neurodegenerative disease at all, and no mild cognitive impairment, and no heart disease. That should be our goal. I believe it's attainable, and it will become increasingly possible in the times ahead. So that's where I think this kind of all fits in.
It's fantastic. Well, Dr. Eric Topol, this has been fantastic. The book is incredible. And I believe, especially for an audience like mine, where I definitely would put myself more in the exploratory aspect of longevity. I'm curious, and I know I'm not the typical person. I see it as a little bit of a hobby, so I'm willing to do certain tests or learn, but I always want to have voices that are out there like yours to help bring balance so that everybody understands an informed consent approach to what they're thinking about with their health. We need all of these conversations to be happening. And I think that your voice in your book is an important one at this time where we might be going too far off in one direction without doubling down on enough of the basics. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your approach to helping us all hopefully step into this space of becoming a super ager.
Oh, thanks so much, Drew. Appreciate the chance to have this fun conversation with you.
Absolutely. The link is in the show notes. We'll be putting that out there to everybody. And the book has gotten fantastic reviews from many people, including individuals like Nassim Taleb, who gave it a great review on X, Twitter, a little while ago. So I thought that was fun to read. Thank you for your incredible contributions to this space. And just like you, I'm excited about the future. And thanks for helping our audience become excited about everything that's available to them now, as well as what's to come in the future too.
Terrific. Thank you.
YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
Blood pressure is a good surrogate for, is it likely that your body can make nitric oxide? 140/90, that might not be high risk, but it is a marker that your arteries don't release nitric oxide very efficiently, and we just gotta figure out why that is.